Welcome to the CPC public meeting of June 11th, 2024. We'll start out with the formalities of taking a roll call. So I will first ask you to say as I call on you, say your name and the committee you represent or your appointment. Paul.
Paul Dome, Recreation Commission appointee.
Thank you. Nancy.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission appointee.
Thank you. Sue.
Sue Felsham, Planning Board appointee.
Thank you, Sue. Ed.
Ed Larner, Housing Authority appointee.
Thank you, John.
John Kratzley, Select Board appointee.
Great. And I'm Burton Flint. I'm a Select Board appointee. We do have a quorum. We were missing a few people, but I think Eve will be joining us in a little bit. We have a lot of things to get through tonight, and I know that Anne sent out the primary piece being to go through all of the various grant agreements so our grantees can get access to their funding ASAP, and sent those all out. So hopefully you weren't looking for them on the website, but you were checking your emails. She was pressing our outside town council to get any comments back on those, and they came in sort of a little late in the process. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. What I would suggest is that we go through those instead of going one by one, that people raise any that they had any comments or concerns about. I would say as a first thing, and it's not on the agenda, is I know we received some additional correspondence with respect to to Warner's Pond, and I had asked that previously that we get an update from the town on Warner's Pond because of the conversations that have this committee's had, and I missed our last meeting, but also that the correspondence we've got, and was told that there would be an update for the select board in mid-June. So given that, I thought it was okay that the town not provided a separate update to us. Subsequently learned that that update might come in July, and I asked, I asked, given that news, that the committee get a direct update. We haven't gotten a response on that, but we got a report that would appear that the CPC funds have long since been spent back in 2001 or 2003, 2021, 2023.
You're referring
Yes, Paul.
to Jerome, right? Not Warren's Pond.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Right. Yes. Thank you,
Okay.
Paul, for correcting me on that. Yes. For Juro, for the park there. So we don't have an update on that from the town. And we're not expecting one at this juncture. But I would certainly be attending the update that the town staff provides to the select board when and if that happens in July. That said, we've got a lot of things to get through. I know we got Sue, it probably drove you crazy. We got all the documentation in PDF format, so you weren't maybe able to make changes, make any edits easily, or maybe you did. Maybe you bought the expensive version of Adobe. Yeah.
The good news is I found a workaround. I simply made the changes in the Word documents and cross-referenced whatever the PDF documents actually said where necessary. The bad news is that I finished doing that at 6:55 this evening. I've had some scheduling problems over the last couple of months. I'm working on catching up, and it's terrible. I sent this giant flurry of emails, and Anne, far too late for her to read or distribute or take into account anything at all that I wrote.
Well, let me first say thank you for all that attention to the documents, and for the workaround. I guess, Anne, as a general comment, I think in future it would be great to get Word versions. So to the degree people have edits or comments, they could easily be made as they're distributed via email to the town. I guess, Sue, what I would ask is, then if you want to raise things that you've probably found a plethora of issues, some of which are of sort of a copy editor version, some of which are probably very substantive. And so if we want to raise those on each one, that would be great. With that, perhaps to jar people's thoughts on this, what I will go through, and I've just got to pull them up here, so bear with me, is I will look at each one that was sent to us and just ask whether people have comments on them. So Does that work for the committee, or does anybody have any comments before we jump in here?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay. So we got a big bulk email about 6 hours ago. And the first thing was the Affordable Housing Trust grant agreement. And I see that we have Keith on the line. I would make one comment about this, and I know there was some back and forth via email about whether there should be the language that allows up to 10% of the grant to be allowed for administrative costs. And if you want to speak to that, or Keith, you want to speak to that, I know there were some considerations from the town about the filings and administrative costs that the town may need to take into account. And Keith, I don't know if you've been part of that conversation. So Anne.
Sure. Let's see. We know that, okay, so from a staffing point of view, the staff for CPC, well, basically the CPC, HCC, and Historical Commission have been understaffed. And so about a year ago, we looked across, at other communities to see what they were doing. And we saw that one community, I think it was Chelsea, has a staff position devoted to CPC and their municipal affordable housing trust. And so at the last meeting, when we had discovered that there were additional reporting requirements to the state for the trust, and Keith had mentioned that there wasn't really staff to do that. But I don't know if I'm quoting you correctly, Keith, so correct me if I'm wrong. But I just sort of made that connection. It's like, well, if there are needs for staff for the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, they're actually allowed to incorporate 10%. So I know that was removed from the contract last year, but I thought that maybe you should talk about, whether or not the trust does need 10% for staff support.
So if I may just, and for the rest committee's benefit, I've spoken with Anne and Elizabeth Hughes about this. Essentially, this boils down to Anne is overtaxed in terms of being able to support the three committees she mentioned, plus the trust. The idea might be that some of the funding that we are dedicating to the housing trust could be spent for staff support as required going forward. You may recall that when we did the rollover of funds that had been originally granted for the Junction Village Affordable Housing Project, which is a great big bunch of money, that went over, and we actually put language specifically in that grant agreement that it wouldn't be used for administrative costs. The town's raised the point that town staff has raised the point that the trust may actually have administrative costs. So that restriction, let's give them that authority, and then presumably that could be a discussion between the trust and the town, because there may be some changing around of Anne's responsibilities, right? In terms of you might be more focused on the historic, the other groups which have your time, and we might have dedicated staffing for CPC and the trust. Is that a fair summary? Okay.
Yes.
And Keith, I think I'll give you you don't have to wait till the end to speak. I'll give you the opportunity. I think you had weighed in saying, hey, we don't need that funding because, and presumably because you'd previously made the commitment that you wouldn't be spending the housing funding on administrative overhead. But I don't know if you've had the chance to consider this, and I will just tell you I'm neutral on this at this juncture.
Right. Thanks Very much. Keith Bergman, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. It's interesting. I've been asking for staffing for the trust for all of the time that I've been chair, which I think now I'm just started my 4th year. So I'm happy to have that issue on the radar screen. But since the trust has $2 million in non-CPA funds in our balance, I'd say that, I'd say that we need not have a provision for admin funds in the CPA grant. I just, all eyes are on how towns are spending their CPA funds, and I am happy to spend non-CPA funds to help address the staffing issues that are now on the town's radar screen. I guess that would be my answer. Let's not do it in this contract. I think the specific reporting requirements that were added, I've already done those.
Yeah.
On my volunteer time, so I don't think that's going to be be a staff function. It's data that we fill out a form and give it to you guys, and then you're responsible for electronically submitting it. So, however that gets done. So I'm happy to say that we're fine without admin funds from the CPA, but we'll be happy to be part of the discussion with the town to help address the staffing issue that they are confronting. We will make every effort to have trust non-CPA funds available for that. So thanks.
Okay. Thanks so much, Keith. And you know what, I conveyed something similar to what you said when I met with Elizabeth and Ann, which was, well, right now you've got Keith, who's a workhorse and gets getting a lot of these things done. But what do we need to sort of, for lack of a better term, institutionalize in terms of town staffing to support the committee for when we don't have the benefit of somebody with perhaps their breadth of experience in these types of filings and administration. So I guess I might say to the committee, if you've looked at the trust grant agreement, it doesn't say you will spend 10% on administration. It says you may spend up to 10%. And I'm inclined to say, let's keep that language in, allowing for that. So this is, again, part of the $500,000 grant, allowing for that. And then there'd be a discussion, between the trust and the town in terms of how staffing would work out. Because like I said, town staff has come to me and said, we don't think we can support 4 different committees in the trust with one staff person who has a whole other, a book of responsibilities as well in the town. Does anybody object to that? In other words, leave the grant agreement as it's drafted on that term.
No objection, actually support that idea.
Okay. Thanks for that feedback. Anybody else have any input on this grant agreement? Okay. So Keith, that'll be in there, and I guess so. I would just encourage you to have that conversation with the town. So you've seen the agreement, and I appreciate your comment that we could take that out. But let me just open the floor to you. Were there any other comments you had from the draft? I think you've seen the last draft that came back from town council.
I saw the first draft that I was sent with my edits, and I haven't seen anything since then.
Okay. And have we lost Ann? We seem to have lost. Oh no, there's Ann.
I'm here.
Sorry. I guess in terms of process, we've received. So let me just make sure, because I know you didn't send the versions off to each applicant, or I don't think you did. But I know you sent it to Keith for his input. So his comments was that in the draft you shared with town council?
No, I hadn't received those yet. I
Okay.
sent them off to Keith and town council simultaneously, and then we just got the feedback from town council, today.
I see. So there may be some consolidation there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got my feedback over the weekend, and I know the chair's smart.
So what may need to happen there, and I guess I would ask on this particular application, because we now have a battle of the drafts, which, as I will tell you as a lawyer, is the bane of my existence when you send it out to multiple parties to review at the same time. That maybe what we'll do, Anne, is we will consolidate any comments, and perhaps if the committee is okay with that, I will review that, and I'm probably not material in that consolidation, and just make sure that those are reflected in the final agreement so that we can have that in an executable form before July 1. Is that acceptable to the committee?
Yep.
Okay. And on that point, Ed, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to say, Keith has been, so good running the trust and everything. At the latest meeting, though, we talked about the need to amend the housing production plan, and he again said he thought he could do it without additional funding for staff on that. So I think we don't want to overload this guy because he's doing such a good job. So okay.
Yeah, if I could, I was able to have a conversation with Elizabeth Hughes earlier today, and I'm now in the loop of what the town's staffing issues are they're trying to solve. And that's why I say the trust will be happy to help the town solve our mutual problem of staffing. So,
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Keith. And thanks for the encouraging words there. We are, like I said, I think we benefit a great from our volunteers, Keith in particular here. We just worry about the town, getting things, set for going forward in the future. The next, I'm just going to go in order in which they appear attached in my email, since that's how they were shared. The Concord Prison Outreach Grant. So this is the grant for funding for the cemetery. I did have some comments on this, but I'll ask if anybody had any concerns or comments on this.
I did not.
Okay.
Hold
what
on, I'm
struck
just going through. So I assume I should not mention any things that are just formatting or
formatting
language.
or
Yeah.
spelling. We'll get those sorted. Yeah.
Okay.
On this one, what struck me is, right, we now have the great unknown, which is the disposition of the prison lands, and actually introduced in this grant agreement is the idea that the cemetery could be moved. Which, yeah, I suppose that could happen. I will tell you that the original they're talking about with the prison moving in conjunction with the Rotary project, they might do something there, and that the original Rotary replacement did have a highway ramp that went right through the middle of the cemetery. That was the approved plan for that. So who knows what may happen? But what I was surprised by in this grant agreement was that it said that if there's a disposition of the land in the next 10 years, which this is standard language, then the beneficiary of the grant will repay the money to this committee. I appreciate that when, and this has actually happened, where the CPC funded restoration of some steps for a church building in West Concord. The church, shortly thereafter restoring the steps, sold it to an arts organization, and as part of that sale, gave back the CPC grant. The CPC funds had essentially improved the building. The owner received the benefit of that, and we asked for the money back. In this case, it doesn't seem reasonable to me that this organization, which is essentially set up for the sole purpose, as far as I can tell, of creating this educational, this spot of contemplation, would be able to return money after it was spent to build this project, if the state decides to sell the property. That doesn't seem reasonable to me. So I would say that the grant would be rescinded if the disposition of the Concord prison property made it such that it was no longer appropriate to have this the seating area and the other items at the cemetery. But if they build these things in presumably the next couple of years, and then the state sells off the prison or moves to the cemetery, I don't think we should be hoping to get our money back from this applicant.
Well, we could attempt to impose a condition saying that the applicant will make every attempt possible to ensure that anything movable will be moved to any such location as it might get moved to. But even then, they can't make the state do that. We could demand that they contact the state and tell the state that they really oughta, but that's
Here's my view on that, Sue, is I think that the people that are coming to us asking for money on this are passionate about recognizing and memorializing these people. And if they move the cemetery, they're going to want to move the signs, and they'll do whatever they can to get that done. but I'm not sure in our grant agreement. Well, I want to say in the first instance, like if we say we're going to spend this $45,000, or I don't have the number right in front of me on this grant, and it gets spent on the construction, there's nobody to go to. There's to get the money back. And it wasn't done in bad faith, and this organization did not get a windfall.
Mm.
If the state decides to move the cemetery. With respect to saying, hey, you're going to move this stuff, I'm hesitant to put some specifics in there about you've got to do this, that, and the other
Yeah.
thing, because who knows what's coming down the pike at us. Yes, Paul. And sorry, Nancy, you may have had your hand up first.
This is just a point of information. There's been discussion among some people on the historical commission that the commission might and should ask for a historic resources inventory now and have that be part of what the state does. And that would give us more information about what's important. And I would think that would include the cemetery.
You mean what's important in terms of maybe preservation within
Preservation.
the state property that's being disposed?
Yeah,
Okay.
we want
Yeah.
those resources identified sooner than later, although we
Okay.
haven't voted on it.
Yes, Paul.
Yeah, so unlike your example where the steps were, somebody else became the beneficiary of the steps, I can't see any other group other than the town itself being the beneficiary of the seating area. And if they move it, it would be at their expense. So I don't, I don't think this is a problem.
Yeah.
That we ought to worry about.
Okay, thanks for that input. So Anne, on this one, with the language I was objecting to, it sort of comes through in two places. There's in section, I guess it's 4F with the grant conditions, it says plans for the future of the MCI Concord are evolving. Should those plans include the relocation of the cemetery or its contents to a different site, all funds will be returned to the CPC as described in section 15C. I think I would say there, if the plans include the relocation of the I might say if approved plans include the relocation of the cemetery prior to the expenditure of funds, the funds will be returned to the CPC. Well, I guess that the funds wouldn't have been granted there, but the funds will not be dispersed to in accordance with this grant is the idea, and you and I can work on that language. And then in 15C, I don't think we want that condition at all, because it talks about the sale of the premises of the adjacent Concord Reformatory Cemetery. The applicant has really no control over any of that. And like I said, I don't think they can return the funds once they're expended on the property. So again, I think 15C should go away. And I think that that under 4F, we should modify that to just be clear that the funds cannot be expended if the cemetery is relocated prior to the expenditure of the funds.
Mhm.
Did you get that in? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. It should be any portion of the funds, I think, just in case.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, any portion of the funds. Yeah. Okay. With that, the next one is the Concord Art Association, which essentially was if people looked at the red lines, there were a lot of red lines in each of these, which were maybe just some updates town council was making in terms of the use of defined terms or some grammatical changes. This one seemed like essentially the template, except for listing out the specific components of the project that would be done. And that's to my eye, they tracked with the application. Did anybody have any comments on this one?
I had basically a question, not only for this, but for other historic preservation projects. There's a requirement for instance, Haywood Meadow and others to have a hired historic preservation consultant on their team. So I think that's fine for this one, but maybe not for others. And to have all town approvals first, that's okay. And the assurances of following the secretary's standards. I think those are all good and appropriate for this project.
So I'm sorry. So you're saying that this grant does have the conditions that you'd want to see, but there were some others that didn't have the same conditions? Or was there one that was missing out of this around having a,
No, I think what you just said is correct, that,
Okay.
for instance, Haywood Meadow requires
okay,
a preservation.
Okay. got it.
To
I
build the
would,
wall.
okay. Any other comments? All right, I'm just gonna, Eve, I've noticed you've joined, so I'll just say, do you want to introduce yourself since you're joining? Your name and committee or appointment, sorry. You're on mute, and Eve may be still in her car as she was rushing home from Boston. I'll move on. The next one is 51 Walden. This one to me read very much like the prior one for the Concord
Yeah,
Art, is it?
And
let me just say I'm recusing myself on this one.
Okay,
This is
thank you, John.
This is John Kratzley.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And if you
so,
could note that for the minutes, that John's recused himself for 51 Walden.
so my comments are pretty much, oh, sorry, should I be recognized?
Sure. Would Nancy please
Okay.
go ahead? Yeah.
Similar to what I said before about 51 Walden, but I forgot to raise a question that I think maybe we've dealt with before. There's a requirement for submitting signed contracts prior and change orders per this town council before starting work. So
Mhm.
that's too late to make any changes. So I don't know, maybe you all would remember why we kept that, because it seems to me we would want to see contracts in draft before they were signed. This is more a question for historic preservation projects than anything else. And they're
That's
also required to submit a full set of plans, but when do we see those? And is it just for the record? Or do we want to see them to stop a potential catastrophe, which is unlikely, but possible?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to guess the reason for requiring a signed contract is that we know that the funds are being dispersed, in accordance with the contract to a contractor, as opposed to weighing in on this on that level of detail in terms of the content of the contract. That to the degree there's a specific a requirement, for example, around the way the project would be undertaken, that we should put that in our grant agreement. On the other hand,
Yeah.
I'm just speculating on the reason there. And if we think we should be looking at these things, we can discuss that. I would say it would probably slow down the process, just given,
Yeah, what's
given,
the process? Well, maybe
Yeah.
it's sufficient to have the requirement for a qualified professional to be on the team. And I've seen other towns where that qualified professional signs off on the compliance with the secretary's standards and whatnot.
I feel like we've done this before,
I
Nancy,
know,
in
I
terms of
feel
the
like it.
language.
I feel like it too, but then I did see something about qualified professionals in some of the historic preservation. So
And
that's good.
so you saw them in some of the agreements, but there's other ones that you're wondering about, and this one would be important, obviously.
I think it's important for all of them, and I'm just looking for clarification that we all agree on that, and that what's in the contracts now cover that, or in the
Okay.
grant agreements cover that.
And maybe what we should see as an example of that. And do you know, was there an agreement that you know off the top of your head that had the specific requirement around having a qualified historic preservation professional?
Yes, I think this is one of them, isn't it?
51
Right,
law.
we're with any project that was funded under the historic preservation category, we included the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we also included the qualified professional.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's the sign off of the qualified professional. Is it sufficient to believe that the qualified professional is responsible for certifying that the project meets the secretary's standards? That's the question.
Right, we'll have to look at the language more carefully and see if
Okay.
it is about, to see if they do sign off.
Okay. It might be. I'll talk to you.
Okay.
I might, this is another one that's got the return of funds if that they've got to return the funds if the building is sold. I believe if I'm looking at the correct one. I believe 51 Walden is a town-owned building.
Right.
Um, so, but maybe this is neither here nor there because the town's not going to sell it. But it doesn't seem to be on the 51 Walden organization, 51 Walden Inc. to return the money if they restore the building and then the town sells it to somebody.
I suppose I
Uh,
could raise that with town council, if the lease changes or if there's, and I actually have forwarded this and the Robbins House
Uh-huh.
Oh,
agreement to Chris Carmody, and because he works with the leases just to make sure that the CPC grant agreement aligns with the lease
oh,
and
good.
see if he has any issues with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful,
Mhm.
maybe for other issues. I think if the town also elected not to renew the lease, I would not also be, that's another scenario where I would not look to 51 Walden to repay what they'd spent to improve the building. At least in these cases, right? Because where what they're
Sure.
doing is they're improving the exterior, they're essentially improving the value for the town, and they wouldn't get that value back if the lease was terminated.
Right.
It's a discussion worth having. So you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, I noticed in several of the agreements, there is a clause saying if the agreement is terminated for violating the conditions of the agreement, then the monies must be returned with interest, blah, blah, blah. In
Mm.
this and several other agreements, there's a condition. In this case, it's 4E saying that if funds have been spent in ways not authorized, the grantee shall be responsible for repayment of such funds. And it doesn't say with interest. So I'm not sure if that's a question for the CPC or if it's a question for town council as to whether we want to include with interest in all of those using the same language as appears elsewhere or not.
Well, that's an excellent question.
I can check
Um,
with them. Mhm.
I mean, I
Okay.
suppose the CPC could choose not to demand interest in this particular case, but I thought I'd better flag it.
And am I remembering correctly that so I'm looking at the 51 Walden, so I don't have an interest clause in front of me that it was 3% per annum that the interest rate was?
Yes,
Um,
in some other agreement. In
Okay.
fact, it's in this very same one under number 15, return of
Oh.
funds fee. But that's about in the event of sale of the premises,
Yeah,
3% interest, but not in event of you have violated the terms of the agreement. That's the difference between
yeah,
them. Yeah.
got it. So, and we can look right to that language.
Okay.
It's funny that 3% per annum, that's a pretty good deal on borrowed money, but in this day and age, but this has never arisen as an issue, so I wouldn't quibble. Okay, so on this one, I think we've got the language here that says that they shall be completed in accordance with the Secretary's standard, and the team shall include a qualified professional. Sue, you've raised the point that if the funds have to be returned because of some sort of misspending, that there should be interest on that, just like in the other return of funds clauses, and that's a general comment across the board. Was there anything else, Anne? Okay, I think that
Right, there's just that one other issue about the lease and the
Oh,
return
right. Yeah.
funds. Right.
Thanks. Yeah. Though I would hope that the applicant here wouldn't be on the hook if the
Right.
town disposes of the properties in a
Okay.
different manner. Okay. The next one I have, let's see, is the Scout House. Any comments on the Scout House?
Nope.
Very similar to 51 Walden.
Yep.
I think the same comments stand. It looks like just going to the return of grant funds. This one, that language about returning the funds, I do think would stand since it's a privately owned building. And if they improved the floor and then sold the property, we would want to recoup the funding. So that 15C should stay in this one. All right, moving on to the Robbins House. Any comments from the committee on the Robbins House grant agreement? Okay.
Hold
You're
on,
making-
just one tiny little comment
Yes, please.
under, this is 4A grant conditions. It says installing storms. For clarity, should it be installing storm windows, or is storms really the preferred term?
I don't know. I would have said
we-
storm windows. I've not referred to them as storms myself, but
we can add the word windows. No
okay.
problem. Mhm.
Thank you,
And
Anne.
they're just this one is a little bit complicated in terms of ownership. So I've been in communication with them to make sure that the CPC has the documentation on who owns the building, who owns the land, what are the agreements with the town, with the national park. So just so that everyone is on the same page and we all know the expectations. So we're
Do you want
still
to?
sorting that out.
Okay, so because it's on park land, but it was a privately
no, no.
funded.
No,
Nope.
it's on town land. The
Town-
Robbins
Town land. Oh, okay.
Town land, managed by agreement with the National Park Service.
Okay. But the building itself is
Yeah,
That's-
owned by the town?
unless we sold it. The park
that-
sold it. I don't think they did.
Well, that's sort of in question. I've seen lease agreements where it shows that the town owns the building, but I think that these are very old lease agreements. So we're trying to find more recent lease agreements that actually
Yeah.
say who owns the building, because the Robbins House, they say that they own the building. And I think it was John
Oh,
Boynton
no.
who could also he attested to the fact that they own the building.
On the building,
But
yes.
you know, where's the deed, right?
Well-
where's the legal documentation to really
Yeah,
prove?
so I'm virtually certain it's not the land because that's called alienation of national park land. It's a really bad thing,
Okay,
So yeah, I would be curious.
but it's not parkland.
So there must be a ground lease of some sort to put the building on. So I very briefly practiced property law and I was terrible, or real estate law, and I was bad at it. But it was, I'm assuming that, I mean, when you build a permanent structure on property, but you don't own the land, that you get a ground lease, generally for some long period of years, like 99 years, or as in the case of the Harvard boathouse on the Charles River, 999 years, which is kind of extraordinary. But then the building, I guess, would be owned as not real property, but some sort of personal or tangible property that's sitting there that wouldn't be covered by a deed, because that's for real property.
oh,
Sounds
okay.
complicated.
That sounds right,
It is
though.
complicated.
Okay. But how that plays into this grant agreement, just so that we don't overthink this, is that they are making the improvements to a building under which we believe they have apparent authority to make improvements because they exercise control over the building. And there's the idea that if the building was disposed, that's the wrong word, but sold or transferred, that we would receive the funding back. Is that the consideration
I think
here?
so.
All right, so I'm just looking at 15C in this context. It says, it looks like it's more or less the same language around sale of the premises. So it's referring to the premises as if it's that building.
Hmm.
Where's that term defined?
Oh, no.
Well, okay, so that you've got the language in there that documents regarding the ownership of the house property, the house and land shall be provided to the CPC. Um, we seem to have maybe we've got a term which it's going to seem really nitpicky at the moment, but we're talking about the premises, the sale of the premises. Oh, here we go. It says while the project or any CPA funded portion thereof is being carried out, the grantee shall install a temporary sign in a visible location on the premises, and that's defined capital P as the premises. That's relevant when we get to 15A, which says if there's a disposition of the premises, we will get our money back. I think that may be dependent upon how we determine ownership, right? Because if they sell the house, the underlying land is that it's owned by the town, right?
Right, the land is owned by the town, yeah.
And it seems to me extraordinarily remote that would change.
Right.
Nancy, is that fair? Okay, so we don't need to worry about that, but perhaps, I mean, nobody's going to sell the Robbins house and turn it into a B&B, right? I mean, nobody's going to extract value that we're contributing to the project from it in that manner. I just don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill here if we need to be concerned about this definition
Well,
of what
they
the premise.
could. They could sell it for a B&B, jack it up, and move it for the 55th time in its well-traveled lifetime. But it really seems so impossibly unlikely.
Yeah,
People would lose their minds. Yeah.
I agree.
All right. I'm not going to overthink this one unless anybody else thinks we really need to delve into the title and the history here.
No.
Okay. Okay. That brings us to the RESO, the Real Estate Housing Services is it organization grant, which is I think largely a repeat of the many prior years ones. There is a one comment to the draft. Anne, if you saw that, clarifying if the 33.5 is a total membership fee or 50%. And obviously it's the latter. It's the 50% of the town's contribution. That's in the conditions. I didn't have any other comments on this one. Anybody on the committee?
No.
Great. Next, Historic Preservation Surveys pre-1775. So this is an MOU, and are we now done with the grants and we're into the MOUs? Obviously, take a pretty different approach, and this is not a legal contract. Which keep in mind when we think about what remedies we might have with respect to the Duro Park in terms of making demands of the town. This is the MOU, and anybody have any comments to this MOU for the pre-1775 survey structure?
Oh, Burton?
Yes, John.
Yeah, I just had a question on especially on the non-town grants. Have the applicants seen the conditions? Were they able to comment on the conditions, or are we sending out a set that no one's ever seen before?
That's a really good question. I know that the grant application went to, well, it's interesting that the trust is a non-town grant, but I know that the trust did receive their grant. I think the 250 trees, because we had questions about the specifics of their requirements, went to them. And did any of the other non-town grants go out to the applicants?
Not yet. So we wanted to get, your opinion first, and then we'll send it out to the applicants, and then maybe more back and forth.
Okay.
So I guess that's my question. If any of the applicants see something that they're concerned about, would we then reconsider, or they'd have a chance to be heard?
I think that would be
Well,
That-
isn't
that-
Anne the applicant for this one?
I am.
No, no,
Well,
I'm
and
talking
this
Have
about
is-
the
any
ones,
comments, Anne?
I should have asked this earlier. It was all
Yeah.
about the ones that are non-town.
I mean,
And-
John, I mean, I think if that, it would be up to the applicant. Obviously, we're putting a little pressure on them that would say, hey, if you want to bring comments to us at this juncture, that that delays the granting of funds, right? Because we've got to reconvene as a committee. But if they objected to that one, then certainly I think that would be reasonable that they'd come back to the committee and say, hey, this is not, you guys got this piece wrong, and that we would consider it. But when's our next meeting in? I feel like we're coming up on the time when we scatter to the winds.
I don't have it in front of me. It's in July. Let me see.
Okay. Oh, it is in July. So I guess, John, an applicant could come back. Yeah. So we'll see.
Okay, I just curious how it would be done. So I guess that's the answer.
Yeah. I think the idea was the ones that we felt like we might get feedback. Anne has already provided that opportunity because they were sort of at the front of the queue. Okay. So I was asking about the one thing I haven't touched on here is we've got this Exhibit A, which is essentially the procedural process. There were some updates there that looked like sort of just language preferences rather than really super substantive changes. Did anybody have any comments on that? Because it's repeated throughout many, if not all of the applicants.
Well, it was odd that we talked about the change orders of the change orders, but after reading through it, I decided it was okay.
The change orders, so the changes to the change order process document.
No, it says supporting documentation for requisition or change order, including any accompanying quotes, blah, de blah, change orders and or other documentation. But
Oh,
it's okay. It's okay. It's
okay.
obviously the change orders of the requisitions, or even the change orders made to the change orders themselves. It's okay.
I'm glad that's obvious to you, Sue. Okay. All right. All right. I think that closes out on the MOU for the pre-1775 structures. Let's see. Concord Middle School athletic fields. Just for people's awareness, there was some question about whether this was that Anne ran down, and thank you very much, Anne, for doing it, that we were replacing funding that was previously approved for town spending. The question it was with whether providing this grant, and maybe we're a little late in the process here, we were supplanting or replacing existing town spending, which is not what you can do with CPA funds. But the answer we got back from town council was that this kind of stuff happens, and as long as the funds have not actually been committed and the project hasn't started, I guess was what they came back with, that the project hasn't started, that we could provide this funding. So just for people's awareness. Did anybody have any comments on this one? Okay. And rather than if you have a comment, because I'm going through my emails pulling up these documents, please speak up since I'm not looking at the screen. That leaves the next one, 250 trees. We had a little bit more detailed conditions on this one in terms of the specific satisfying the specific categories of historic preservation and open space and recreation. And can you confirm whether this draft reflects any comments back from the applicants here, or if they raised any concerns?
They haven't raised any concerns. I talked to Krista today and she had a few questions about process, but not about the grant agreement itself.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sue, you had your hand up.
Yes, under item 5, it says the sole purpose of dividing funding for this project is to provide the awardee the greatest flexibility in locating trees. Should we add a requirement either as part of this condition or a different condition saying that the awardee, the grantee, has to report back to us what proportion they actually use the funds in so that we can keep our records straight?
That is a really good idea. Yes, because that is something at least I know I referred to in my presentation from a town meeting is how we do this. And could we add that I think as a um, to 5, I think. We've got that they will provide this. So you were reading, and forgive me, Sue, because I think you were reading from the version that hadn't been edited by town council, or maybe you were just reading straight through the red lines. But in 5, could we add the requirement that the applicant will provide to us the allocation based upon the 3 categories of in terms of the actual spend?
We could, but I don't know if you are able to move the buckets around after.
I'm not saying we are specifying which they are. We're saying once they do it, we want to know how it was spent. Because let's say they end up doing it all. Let's say they figure out that they're going to spend all of this money on the high school grounds to fix the evident tree problem at the high school, right? And I know that's not the plan, but just for argument's sake, then that would all fall into one category. It would not be historic preservation. There would be a 0, and they would have $250,000. I guess that would be in recreation or open space, probably in open space, right? That would move the needle a little bit on terms of our allocation year to year on what categories we're funding, and we would want to know that.
Okay. Yes, I'll figure that out.
So essentially, we just need a statement that they're going to report back to us the
Okay.
percentage of funds spent on each category
Okay.
in the closeout.
Can I ask a question about that specifically?
Please, yeah.
Perhaps I should introduce myself at this point. Wicked late, Eve Eisenberg, town select board appointee. Sorry for my tardiness. How do the trees become historic preservation? Help me out here as an idiot.
If they're planted in to improve a historic district. So the idea could be that, for example, let's say in Concord Center, they were replacing on Elm Street an alley of elm trees, right? In the historic district, or yeah.
Or
Nancy.
perhaps the alley leading to the bridge from the parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that
Right.
would be a historic tree, historic preservation.
Yes, that would be the idea.
Yeah. Or in Sleepy Hollow or some other
Yeah.
area, some other historic area.
And I suspect that'll be the big one is Sleepy Hollow. Yeah. Or
Did-
the other
tree
cemeteries.
in a historic place is a historic tree.
That's
Yeah.
correct. They don't actually have to plant 500-year-old trees.
Did Krista ask for an addition of native trees? I think their intent is that, but it's worth checking with her maybe if you didn't get that request. It came up at a memorial committee meeting.
She didn't bring it up as a part of the conditions of the the grant agreement.
Well, they were talking about it. So maybe it's easy to check.
Yeah.
I think that's their intent.
And she
Well, they've
just
said
wants
many times it's their intent, but not necessarily native in the sense that they would take climate change into account. And I don't know if you could consider a Maryland tree to be native to Concord, but it will be soon if it isn't already.
I think it's a broad range you're talking about, native trees.
Paul.
Yeah, so I have some comments on the conditions. I found it a little
Please.
confusing. Let me just start with the ordering. Condition number 1, it seems to repeat the application itself. I guess that has to be in there. That's what the trees are being used for. That's the application. So I see that if we leave that in there, I think number 2 is basically should come after 3 and 4 because the way this is worded, 3 the awardee submits a plan to the CPC, right? And so that's before any work is done, before any contract is signed, I guess. So I think 3 and 4, which imply that the awardee has to submit materials to CPC for approval, if that's the case. I think those both have to come before too. It's just a little confusing, the order there. And secondly, the timing on the submission of full plans and specifications. It's not clear when that has to happen. I assume it's before the work starts.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah, so that should be kind of the first step, and I think we should put sort of a time frame on that, at least before any contract to sign or work is commenced.
Yep.
So I think there's a timing issue on number 3. And my question is, are we as CPC really going to review these plans for compliance with CP? I assume we are. So we have a sort of a review of a plan in our future, which I think is fairly specific to this applicant. It implies that we have some work to do and we have to further approve things before any work starts. Is that the case?
Nancy, doing it.
I think it's much more, I agree with you, but I think it's much more important for historic structures than for the planting of these trees. But I take your point, and I think the question is, when do we know that the applicant is following da 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 da? In the case of historic structures, the Secretary of Standards, for instance.
Well, I think it starts with a full set of plans. I mean, at least the way this is written, the applicant would have to say, okay, this is where we're going to plant these 125 trees. And, you know, some of it will be open. And these are the categories we think they're in. CPC then agrees with that plan and agrees with the categorization. At that point, we know how many are historical district trees. It seems like it's pretty prescriptive, but maybe that's the way it has to be here.
So my thought is, I mean, we very similar discussion to what Nancy raised previously on how much are we going to review a particular project. This is a project where, because of the discussion about the appropriateness, like we need to make sure we've determined that the funding can be spent on trees, but it needs to be spent in a particular way. I agree with the reordering. I guess the question is whether we're adding in specific requirements of you're going to submit the plans, you know, some amount of days before, you know, execution of a contract or commencement of work, so that we have an opportunity to weigh in. We don't have language in this contract that says, you know, the plans are subject to approval by the CPC or anything like that. And I don't know how far down that path we want to go. I agree, Paul, with your general sentiment that I think we should be taking a look at this. But we've kind of got a little bit of a can of worms in front of us, because, as Nancy just pointed out, if we're going to do it for this.
I don't know why we have 3 and 4 in there if we are planning on reviewing and giving a thumbs up. Is it just pro forma, you know, for the records, or is there some action we have to take?
That's a great question.
Well, 4 is that we're doing the review, isn't it? That is the work.
But we don't know the whole plan. So I think it's less important for these trees than for, you know, what people are doing when they're taking apart historic structures and putting in air conditioning and whatnot.
And in this case, is the funding here, and maybe you remember this, the funds, are they going to DPW to acquire the trees, or were they going to use an external company, an arborist of some sort?
Well, we did talk about that today. Process-wise, they do need to partner with a town department, so they will be partnering with CPW, but the CPW will be hiring an outside entity to, you know, purchase the trees and plant them. That's my understanding anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, that's number 2. Yeah.
I mean, because what I'm wondering about, I was wondering if these are funds that are just going to the town, and whether there's going to be an actual contract to review. Sounds like there will be a contract to review. But the more important part, as Paul's raised, is that they should, and Eve just pointed out, is that they should be providing us plans, and we are going to look at the locations to confirm that they comply with eligibility requirements.
Right.
I think that maybe the easiest way to do this, rather than put in sort of a complicated acceptance procedure, for lack of a better term, I'm thinking about sort of commercial contracts, would be that we move move what's number 2 down so it's the new number 4. So the submission of plans, the review process precedes that, and that the work will not commence until they've received our approval. And it's not so much about a matter of reviewing the specifics of the contract, though where they'll say that before they execute the contract, but that they've got our approval, but and that we'll have a proposed contract to look at. But I think that that's the simplest way to provide our input here, that prior to the commencement of work, they would
Yeah,
obtain.
I agree. You know, the additional complication here is only half of this funding is CPA funding, right? So
That's
presumably
right.
half of the trees don't have to comply with the CPA. So
Yeah, that's true. They
it's
don't.
yeah.
But it's certainly for the trees that they're planting. I think
Yeah.
it makes sense that we're looking at where it is and that we would say that before they commence work, they'd give us the sign off. And do you follow those comments generally?
I do.
Without,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which may bring us back to Nancy's comment about how involved we are in reviewing historic preservation projects, which are, to your point, Nancy, I appreciate you would be even more important because you can't really unscramble an egg if you do a historic preservation project badly.
Mhm.
We haven't, I don't know to the degree we've talked about how much we want to have input on the plan after the grant application. I don't think we've really talked about that previously, but these grant agreements are certainly opening that door.
Yeah, it's probably not okay to insert this big question here now for this round. But I think it's important to think about when CPC wants to review what's planned, because when the application comes in, it's not as specific as it subsequently becomes when they start putting the rubber to the road and making construction drawings and stuff.
I'm thinking about that painting of, I believe it was Jesus in a Spanish church that got restored. Has anybody seen that picture? It was like, essentially it looked like somebody just taken a crayon and done it.
I think I've seen that.
Somebody was, oh yeah, let's restore that painting. And then it was like some local person who did it.
Yeah, so that's probably not for this round, but just hanging out there.
I think it's a really excellent point. And I'm thinking about it also in the context of how we've been sort of being asked now to take a look at the way funds were expended for the park, the Duro Park, and whether we would. I mean, you could really dive into the details in terms of looking at, well, did you get a performance bond? Did you do that? Like all these things. That's not really our wheelhouse, but we could define maybe with a little more clarity what our role should be there going forward.
Yeah, maybe so.
Okay. Thank you for that really good discussion. I think the next one is preservation and reproduction of the historic documents, the library. So this is the archivist application or the MOU there. I'm not seeing anything sort of unique about this. Any comments? Okay, great. Like easy. Hillcrest Conservation Land Steps. Again, another MOU. More or less follows the template. I'll be honest, I didn't have a chance to look at this one before the call. So if anybody has any comments, please weigh in.
I have my hand up, so I was not,
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah. I noticed that what the project is a survey and design of the stairs. And I wondered if any thought has been put out in the survey. They actually talked to the abutters and neighbors on whether they want this project. Because I did talk to 2 neighbors up there and both fairly elderly. But they were not negative about it, but they just didn't really see it as something that they would want in their neighborhood.
So there is, I don't think that it's within the scope to do sort of a public outreach effort. And I think that just my experience in watching how the town engages outside professionals for these types of things. You hire an engineer to do these things. You hire sort of a firm that specializes in public outreach. If you're engaged in a public process like that, I certainly, I mean, I wouldn't want to spend money on this if there was a subsequent request for funding that we knew were going to fail because there was a negative reaction from the neighborhood. But just I would relay this was approved, and this it followed on actually a multi-year process. We've been looking at these applications for. There was an original application, and then we said you need to get the town on board. They've come back, and there was a long process that was involved here, and it was a if not perhaps not a formal, but a neighborhood group that requested this and then drove this through the town process. That doesn't mean it's gonna get funded ultimately. They may come back and say, hey, we're gonna have to move in 50,000 cubic yards of earth to make a ramp that meets ADA requirements. And then the town and the neighborhood may say, no, that's not what we want. And we would have spent money and learned that it's not feasible.
No.
Paul, yes.
Yeah, I mean, two comments. First of all, this is the design and feasibility stage, so you're right, nothing's actually being done yet. But I seem to recall we've had extensive discussions on as part of the application procedure, having public outreach and public consultation. And so that I think at least initially the horse is out of the barn on the public consultation because that was part of the application. Assuming I think that did take place. Because I live in a neighborhood, it doesn't mean everybody agreed on it, Ed, but I think we're at the stage now where we're past that. But to the point of the construction itself, let's see where it takes us, and I think there will have to be another application for actual construction, I guess. And at that point, it's a new public outreach process.
Yeah, and Ed, maybe for Exhibit A on that, what can happen is you look to the Warner's Pond discussion, right? The town came for funding, the town had a plan, the town changed the plan, the public has weighed in, and it's resulted in quite a public discussion. Not to say that would unfold for these steps, which are smaller in scope, but this is not the town's got to come back with a proposal that makes sense based upon the planning that's done here. Eve, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I hit a weird button on my computer just now. Sorry. The third condition there asks is like form words for receiving plans and specifications for the work to be completed. But the work to be completed is to do a survey with some engineers. It's not plans and specifications for fixing some stairs. So is it still an applicable situation for plans and specifications to be submitted? Because the end result of this will be plans. It's not what we're funding. Right? We're funding.
So the design survey and design wouldn't result in plans and specs.
It would at the end, but it says okay, I guess it just says
I get what you're.
Yeah, I guess this is what happens at the end of what we've done. Like we've already taken all of our money and then we get plans at the end, but we're not accepting plans in order to do any work because that would be backwards. This is right?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying because we're saying it's got to start with plans and specification prior to doing the work. And those.
But the work is to create.
And I think that number 3 is.
I would probably just take that out. It's not really applicable to this application.
I agree, Eve. And you get the.
Unless I misunderstood.
Sue, do you want to comment on that point?
In this case, aren't the plans and specifications the RFP, or do we not include that?
To hire someone, you said?
Yeah, that we would want to see who they're asking to hire in what respect, or do we not do that sort of thing? I guess if we did, we would also have to do it for the survey of pre-1775 structures, and we didn't do that.
That's covered in 2, which is to submit a copy of signed contracts. So then we know who the engineer is.
But I wouldn't want to start getting this committee involved in the selection of engineers and things like that, or whether the scope of the town request, when they do an RFP. meets our require, whether we want to review and discuss that, because we would bog down everything here.
Mhm.
I think, Sue, that the language as Eve has identified is standard language, which is included in a project which is funding the construction of something, and
That's
and
right.
nothing's being constructed here. So
Okay.
I would agree to take out 3.
But don't you want to see the results of your work? You
The
know,
So
very
then,
end, yeah.
so then we
Right.
can do, we could change the language around to say, the awardee will submit to CPC the survey design and development cost estimate, the survey design and design plans and development cost estimates upon completion of the work, or something like that. Because yeah, and it would be good to see that, because another comment that we've gotten from the public recently is, what happens to these projects where you fund design and survey costs, and how do you keep track of those things? And that would be helpful to know that we're getting the results back.
Are those plans a matter of public record at that point?
I think so.
Yes. Mhm.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Burton, I'm wondering, so when an RFP goes out and bids are received and a contractor is hired, should CPC be seeing, well, I guess that we see the contract, we see the pricing of the contract, correct? That's in there. We're gonna see
Yeah,
that.
presumably, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Paul, I don't recall us getting this documentation back as part of our cycle, that we've received back contracts and all of that. Or the contents of RFPs. If anybody recalls that on this committee, that we've been involved at that level.
No, I don't think we review it, but I'd like to see the contract, because we funded 75,000. If the contract comes back at $40,000 and the project can be done for 40,000, we should know about that, right?
Right. I mean, the staff and the treasurer do review contracts just to make sure that the scope is eligible. And, before POs are created, that's when the treasurer and staff do take a look at the contracts.
And I think it's covered in number 2, prior to commencement of work, the board shall submit to CPC a copy of any signed contracts.
Yeah.
That's number 2 on the conditions of that project.
I guess since I'm your treasurer, I should have known that, but I don't. I know I review expenditure, but I don't recall seeing contracts. But if I should and I just did, I apologize.
So process wise, and Nancy, I see you raising your hand, but let me just ask for Anne, because I think that we might not have an appreciation of how much staff work goes into here. So the applicants, are you? I feel like sometimes we do these grant agreements and the applicants go off, and we don't hear from them for years and years until we say, hey, what's the status of the project, so that we can claw back any unspent funds. But it's sounding like this process where is being followed, where they go out, they sign an agreement, that agreement is then provided to you, and you're reviewing it before any purchase orders are issued.
Yes, staff and the treasurer.
Okay. Okay.
If you
And
feel
so
that-
then the question that we're sort of poking at here is, do we want to be involved in any of that review of the contract, potentially before contract signature, or the output of work, which is, in this particular case, non-tangible. So design and permitting work or things like that, to verify that it was done or it's going in the right direction, right? Is that what I'm hearing from the committee generally?
Yeah, I think it's
Nancy?
similar. We've hired consultants to write strategic plans, right? And
Yeah.
it's not looking tangible as a report, so it's similar. We see those. It's a deliverable. Sure.
I think that if we're getting these twice a year forms sent in on the progress of the project status reports, I think those are twice a year, right, Ann?
Yes, earlier they were not, but we built that into the last round.
Right.
And into this
So
round, right, the contract agreements. Mhm.
even though we might be not the people who are reviewing and approving things, we are, the staff is, and then we're made aware of it twice a year with these status reports. That might be considered oversight to a certain extent, just awareness of what's going on.
And I mean, Nancy was the treasurer before Paul. I mean, were there other steps that you felt needed to happen, or do you feel as if that procedure worked out pretty well?
I'll say what I remember, and that was that I always wished we had site visits before the work was undertaken. And it was too late when you have construction drawings and an RFP specifying what the work is. You don't, I mean, that's too late. So it's a big, big question, and staffing certainly is implicated in this in terms of increases. But, and that may
Yeah.
not be realistic, but it is nerve-wracking to spend a lot of money and not know where it's going.
But historically, we've never really done that CPC review role unless the staff brought something to our attention.
I know
Right.
that's what I
You know,
was.
and I think I just have I don't agree with you
agree.
really that we need to do this kind of committee work. Mike, yeah, I don't think we need to be so detailed, and we never have been in the past. There's been a creeping growth of these requirements that I have not particularly been fond of.
It's
But
our
now we've got Ian.
responsibility. It's our responsibility as the committee. I think. So it's a big discussion, actually.
Yeah, I mean, so I will just say I've been thinking about this a lot, just mainly in the context of the Giroux project, what's appropriate in terms of oversight and versus. So I think in terms of as somebody who used to work a long time ago, worked on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. You know, there's the committees that write the checks, there's the committees that authorize things, and there's the committees that provide oversight. And I view us as being an appropriations committee, right? So we appropriate projects. There's a separate it's got to be within authorized, that somebody else is authorized doing that work, whether it's the town or otherwise, and then there's an oversight role. Now we don't formally have oversight committees per se in Concord, so it's a lot more fluid. It's not quite that structured, and I think that we've gotten along really well with not doing things like reviewing contracts prior to commencements of work and things like that. We now have an example where it would appear, I mean, we're waiting for an update, but it would appear that there was some goofs, for lack of a better term, on the contracting on the Giroux Park and on the management of that as a project, and that maybe we could have provided some oversight after the fact. After the fact, it would appear that some oversight perhaps could have been beneficial, but I think that's such an outlier opportunity that I'm inclined to agree with John that we want to be really careful in terms of expanding really what our role is. There may be particular projects like 250 trees, or maybe let's say, a historic preservation project that was to a particular crown jewel where we'd had a lot of discussion with the applicant about, well, this really needs to be done a particular way, and we want to make sure that they don't come in and end up not meeting the promises that they made in the site visit process. That might be the case on a case by case basis, but I wouldn't want to sort of bake it into our forms that we are going to be reviewing RFPs, that we're going to be reviewing contracts or plans prior to commencements of work. That's my view.
A fallback guarantee is sort of having that qualified person involved in, for instance, historic preservation project.
There you go. Yeah.
But there's no counterpart for other kinds of projects, maybe.
That's very true.
Like
I'm going to go back to Nancy, what you said, which is this would be a big change to put this into any things today. I mean, I think we talked about 250 trees are going to provide us the plans, and then there's going to be the sign off for that particular project, because we need to make sure that it's in accordance with the requirements of the act. But I think this is a really good discussion in terms of going forward. If we want to, in the late summer, early fall, when we look at I think it's called the plan, but I think it's like a charter document, right? That we revise from time to time, what our role would be in reviewing it, following that, the granting. And now with that, Mary, I see you've raised your hand.
I
So
have.
maybe you get some insights here.
I do a little bit. I know that some of the work that you're doing right now is partially a reaction to some of the questions that have been raised around the Giroux, the management of the Giroux contract. And that was originally on the select board agenda, and I'm the one who pushed it off because I wanted to have more definitive answers. So, but I guess I would, and I want to be able to, when we have our Giroux review, have some definitive answers and not just, we're still working on it. But I want to caution you to not react too much to just some allegations of mismanagement that have not been substantiated and in fact, I think are unfounded. So if you're reacting to one person, allegations, I want to caution you that you don't want to overreact too much to that and change all of your processes and make a lot of work for yourself when I think when we do have our review, you'll see that this project has in fact been managed properly. It's had some real issues, but it's not mismanagement on the part of the town, of our procurement, of our site reviews, of our performance bonds. There's been no mismanagement. So that's what I want to say.
Thanks, Mary. And you're wise counsel to keep us from jumping to conclusions based upon that. I look forward to the review. I'm
Thanks.
actually responding more to the fact that I was expecting to be sitting in a nice park about 3 years ago, and I go down there and
Me too.
it's got some major issues. And as you
It
may
does.
be aware, I was involved in that from the get-go, from reaching out to the landowner, to see if they would sell to the town, going back, what is that, 9 years. So that's more my
I agree.
reaction. Now I've seen
Yep.
some things and that have been eyebrow raising, but I also know you got to listen. You got to wait till the facts come out. Okay, so
Thank you.
And thank you for that those wise words. Eve.
I just want to point out what's probably obvious to everyone, which is as a group of dedicated volunteers, we may or may not be really qualified to make a lot of these reviews of contracts and stuff. Certainly I'm not. And as you said, like with our timeline and our meeting schedule and our open meetings, it would hold things up. I have thought of a compromise. I don't know what people think of this, but we dedicate some of our funds, the CPA funds, to our staff, to Anne and the groups there. And what if we had somebody that we could add to that team in the office of the planning department that could review, that was qualified to review historic compliance and maybe contracts that, if needed, could be tasked with following up on these progress reports or hunting down more information that we might need, but we would stay as volunteers in the role of disbursement, as you mentioned, and any kind of like back of the scenes oversight, or even just keeping projects in our view when needed, could be part of the staff responsibilities, but not dumping it all on Anne, because Anne's doing a great job, but adding to the team there. What do we think about that?
If I may, and I want to let other people speak, but I think that's a little bit when Elizabeth Hughes and Anne reached out to me earlier this week or last week about staffing, a little bit of it was that we've got a lot of administrative stuff like that. I mean, there's some professional experience that would be helpful if you're reviewing contracts and things but more administrative stuff that frankly has gotten really compressed in terms of staff's ability to handle things. That's why we just had the discussion about potentially some staff funding to balance out with a housing trust, because the idea might be that somebody with Anne's expertise specifically in historic preservation and town planning could be better spent on some of the historic preservation stuff, and we might benefit from more attention from somebody who can attend to those administrative matters. So I think the town is thinking about that, because we've got great professional staff who is looking at that and trying to balance that workload out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nancy.
I think that's a great idea, and it's explicitly anticipated in law. I think that you can hire consultants to help with the
Yeah.
review.
I mean, we spend about a third of what we could spend under the CPA on administrative support. So and historically we spent very small amounts because a lot of our administrative expenses were eaten by the town, our legal expenses and such. But we've been pretty parsimonious with our administrative costs. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, two comments. Anne reminded us and me that one of the roles of the treasurer is to take a look at the contract, at least from the financial end. So there's a little safeguard on that. It's not the legal end, but the financial end. So we should do that. So there's backup amongst us. On the oversight, I think you'll agree, we have a really good mechanism for oversight, and that's the biannual reports, the progress reports. If those reports are done well and they highlight not only what's been done, but if there are problems, we can know what's going on a little bit better. So I think it's both the quality and we need to make sure those progress reports are done and that they're done well, and that they're not just perfunctory fill out the forms, but that the applicant really gives CPC a briefing on what's going on with the project. That would be very helpful. But we have that mechanism there already.
Paul, I remember we're getting an update from the recreation department on the Emerson Field project that was sort of like a one-liner, like, yeah, we finished the project. And this committee went back and said, could you expand on that? So yeah, I agree with you. And I missed I was traveling for work. I missed the last meeting, but I know there's a bunch of new project reports that have been posted. I presume that those were reviewed. You guys went through some of those at the last meeting, but yeah, that's obviously an important focus, especially once we get beyond a town meeting and have a little bit more time. I think this has been a really good discussion. I want to keep pushing through the rest of make sure we get through all the grants. So, or now the MOUs. So we were at, I believe we're at the White Pond APOD grant. Any comments on that one?
I have a really brief comment. So in the introduction of the project, it talks about, I think, water quality inspections. So that project is to buy the two APODs to pay for the maintenance of those APODs.
Mm-hmm.
But in the MOU, somehow the term water quality inspections has slipped in there. And that, I don't know what that is. That wasn't in the application. I'm just wondering what that is, Anne.
It says water quality improvement efforts, you mean?
No, it says inspections right at the get-go. Project objective as approved by town meeting. It says funds to continue water quality improvements by purchasing two APODs and for water quality inspections.
Oh, I see.
I didn't think inspections was part of that. I'm not sure what that is. I know Board of Health and NRC takes care of inspections, water quality measurements. That's not what this is. So I think that's a little superfluous language in there.
Yeah, and actually, so Anne, could you double check against the application, which is the basis of the approval at town meeting, and see if that calls out inspections? Because I thought that the running of the cost to run the APODs and any inspections that was going to be a town expense outside of what we're funding.
Yeah, the application doesn't have mentioned inspections.
Okay.
You can put that in, but
Okay.
so
Thanks for checking that,
check
Paul.
it. Sure, I'll
Good
check
catch,
it.
Paul.
yeah.
Great. Next one, Haywood Meadow Wall. I think this was the one, Nancy, that you said you wanted to make sure that there was language about a historic preservation.
Could we look at the three conditions really quickly? I think there's just a funny thing there that says hire preservation professional to build the wall.
Yeah, it does. It says we're
I
gonna.
don't think you want that person to build the wall.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing, that was the only funny thing I saw in this whole bunch. So is that correct that it says something like that? I don't.
You're exactly right. It does say hire a historic preservation consultant to rebuild a 50-foot section of wall, which reminds me of what is that saying? Like if you can't teach, if you can't teach, consult, or something like that.
Something like that. Anyway, that's easy to fix. I think you want a qualified professional stonemason, but
Mason.
you can still hire, you can still have, you can still consult with somebody who knows something about historic stone walls. And many masons do, but because
So
stone walls anymore.
you had previously raised the point on other historic preservation projects that there should be this somebody with a historic preservation consultant involved and the team
Yeah. I think
works for
that's in
this
there.
where I mean is that in here?
I think it's in most of the projects that are historic preservation, right, Anne? That
Right,
a
it's in the
qualified
historic,
person.
it's in the historic preservation projects, but
Yeah.
this project was an open space project. It's not considered
Yeah.
a historic
Oh,
preservation.
really?
project.
Okay.
Right. So it doesn't have exactly the same requirement, but it requires the same sensitivity of it. You want to be
Okay.
careful who your stonemason is.
I think given their prior experience with the Haywood Meadow stone walls that I'm going to guess they're going to be very careful about
Pretty good. Yeah, pretty
having rebuilt the first one.
yeah.
Okay.
And there's a little glitch there on occasion. but that was fixed. So
Okay. Next up, the Assabet River pedestrian bridge.
so great. Oops.
No comments. Let's just see. Connecting this prior to the. This has the same comment that Eve, you raised before. The third one is providing a full set of plans and specifications for the work to be completed. I think the idea is that I don't think that language applies, but we can tweak it to say you're gonna provide the CPC with the completed plans and specifications with the plans and specifications upon completion of the work funded by this project.
I thought that we were funding the actual construction at this point. I didn't realize we were still funding planning.
No, we're funding actually a portion of the remaining planning. So this was the one that needed about. We're funding $200,000. I think a total of something like $600,000 or $800,000 is needed to get this to the 100% design phase.
I see.
The
Yeah, then it
town
does apply.
had applied for 2 different grants to cover that gap. The additional about 70, I don't know if it was 50 or 75% of the cost. I think they got one grant, didn't get the other grant, are in the process of seeking additional state funding for that. And so we'll wait to hear if we hear news on that. But then the actual project, I mean, this is $200,000. The actual project is like $9 million, which is essentially in the queue for the Metropolitan Regional Planning Commission's funding, 5-year funding plans.
Nice.
So subject to it being us delivering 100% plan.
Yeah, so that it's the same third clause as the stairway.
Right. So, and do you see that they don't deliver the plans prior to it.
Yes.
They deliver the plans and following completion of the
Right.
project. Yeah.
Yep, I've got it. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you so much. 2 more. Hang in there. All right. Cemetery metal structures. This one is essentially very little deviation from the form MOU. I think the description in the conditions specific to the project track to my understanding of the application.
I'm good.
This actually, in looking at it now, the third one, right, this is again one of those ones where the deliverable here is essentially a report, right? It's not construction. So it doesn't make sense to say that they've got to deliver plans and specifications for the work to be completed with CPA funds, because it's going to be an RFP followed by a report. Okay. Then lastly, We have our administrative MOU.
Got a couple hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking. John, yes, please.
Yeah, I was just curious, think back historically, do we specify which part of the town government carries out these grants? Do the MOUs, I mean, you read these and you have no idea who's doing the work. Um,
Hmm.
It just says we're giving money to the town. Now, maybe we don't need to know. In many of these, we do exactly know because they told us in their applications. But I'm just curious if we've always just sort of the MOUs are just generic to the town, and we
Well, they're
don't.
addressed to 4 people, right? They're addressed to Anne, the town manager, the CFO, and the procurement manager.
Oh, and in this case, it's addressed to Aaron McCloskey, the highway and ground superintendent, and he was the applicant. So the applicant always comes first.
Oh, okay.
And Elizabeth Hughes was the applicant for the bridge. She signed the application as the applicant.
Okay.
So the answer is in the final. I should go look at it. The answer is in the final signature line.
At
There
least
is
There's
there
no
is
signature.
Go ahead.
The answer is in the two section at the top of the memo of who we're addressing the direction to. But you're right. I mean, it is a memorandum. It is not a it's not a legal contract.
Oh, there it is. It's up in the 2.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
And
Fair enough.
oh, sorry. So this one, to Nancy's point, is this one is a historic preservation project, and I accidentally neglected to include the exhibit C and D, and those are the ones about the Secretary of the Interior standards and the qualifications of the person working on the project. So those
Okay.
things should be added in. Mhm.
Are those relevant to when you're doing an assessment of the scope of work? I think that having somebody who's a professional, a historic preservation consultant would obviously be who you want to hire, but completing the work to the, I mean, I don't have the language of that exhibit in place about meeting the secretary standards, but does that work when you're talking about doing an assessment like this?
Yes, we're working on historic preservation survey now, and some of the funding is CPC, some of it is from the state, the Mass Historical Commission, and they do require, the Secretary of the Interior standards be included in the contract documents, even for a plan.
Oh, okay, great, good to know. Okay,
I don't
so
see the professional being required here.
now which one are
Right.
you looking at, John? Are you looking at the staff funding or are you looking at the cemeteries?
The cemeteries.
Right, that was my mistake. It was an inadvertent omission, which I'll add in. Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. With no further ado, unless there's any further comments, we have gotten through all of these grant documents. I think we do have some changes that were made. If the committee is okay with it, yes, Sue.
Sorry, I must have missed the part with the the housing trust at the beginning where you asked for comments, and then Keith was gone and it was not important to raise something at the time. So I do actually have a couple comments on that document.
Okay, turn to that one. Just give me a second so I can open it up. Yes.
Yeah. All right, so under condition, these are the conditions notes under item 3 on page 2 of the document.
Yep.
In B, it talks about what is due within 30 days of the completion date. But this is funds being given to the housing trust for them to do whatever comes up when it comes up. So I don't understand what the completion date is.
Fair
It
point.
also talks about the work and at some point, the project. Right, it talks also under B about toward completion of the work, which, I mean, completion of the work when everyone who can't afford housing has housing.
Well,
It just seems like odd phrasing for,
it's the form phrasing, right? I mean, so
it
this
is.
is it's not the form that's slightly askew. It's that this funding is different from what we've done in the past, where it's undesignated to a particular project. So,
And that's exactly what I mean, that we have taken our boilerplate, which makes sense ordinarily, but this funding is different from all other funding.
so maybe what we want to do, I mean, it doesn't make sense to ask for digital documentation and so forth, digital photo documentation, but rather it does make sense just to ask for an update every 6 months to know where the funding is going, right?
Right, well, it depends. I suppose we could ask for digital documentation if money has been dispersed directly for some unit of housing and there isn't somebody else who would be on the hook for giving us that documentation. But
Mhm.
but there wouldn't necessarily be completion or documentation.
Okay.
I'm not sure
I
what to
think
do about it. It just seems odd to
no.
use
I
the
think I think
boilerplate.
it's
Yeah.
relatively simple to straighten out. You just have to sort of step back and stop reading the words and then write what's actually meant, which I think everybody knows. But so Anne, I think it's 3B, right? It's okay, I think, to refer to the funding of town, just generally the funding of community housing as the project. But I think that what we should be asking for is just 6 month progress updates in 6B, and then um, documentation, including where reasonable, digital photos of specific, not capital P, a specific housing that's created uh, using the grant funds. Does that make sense?
I think I understand.
Yeah. You said you had another comment on it, Sue. Yeah.
Yeah, as a very small note under item 4, it says the trust shall identify in writing the contact person responsible for the administration of the project. Many of these other things say you must provide us with whatever it is within 30 days of awarding of the grant funds. And should there be a time by which they have to provide the contact, like within 30
Oh,
days?
yeah. So this is a little bit different, right? I mean, we could have those specifics, except while this is a grant document, because the trust is not a town department, I think that it is a town committee, and I think that the town knows how to get in touch with the trust.
Well, then why demand the contact at all? But yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, in fact, and I think we can get rid of 4 because we know that the person responsible is going to be the chair of the Concord Affordable Housing Trust. Does that make sense?
I mean, because weren't you just talking about staff and I remember a discussion about this last year. I don't quite remember what it was.
Well, we're talking about I mean, if certainly if I have questions, I'm going to want to know, speak to Keith about it. Or speak to you about whether we have, we need to get an update from the trust via Keith, or Keith's successor as chair of the trust.
Okay, sure. Okay, we can omit it.
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense when it is an external project. In this case, the town will always know who's responsible for the trust.
Right.
Because they are appointed by those people are appointed by the select board.
Yeah.
Don't they also have redundant reporting requirements for the state?
That's, I think, what Ann's identified that needs to be,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Needs to be done. Okay. Sue, anything else on this? Okay. I think that brings us to our next agenda items, which was approval of minutes. We had minutes from May 14th of this year. That was a meeting that I was not able to attend, so I don't have any comments on those minutes. Did anybody else have any comments on the minutes of May 14th?
I actually have a comment on my own comments on the minutes, which is I found a bunch of things in the minutes, and one of the things that I found, I corrected something that was actually correct. And so I want to withdraw my correction of the thing that was actually correct and correct it back to what it was in the first place.
Please tell me that your
What?
revision to the comments on the minutes were pertaining to you discussing the minutes at the last meeting.
Oh, I really wish that would be just so
Okay.
wonderful. But
So you
unfortunately,
provided
it's not.
those comments. Did you provide those to Anne directly? And was that the only one, so she knows which ones to disregard?
Yes, actually, as long as we can approve the minutes as amended per what, no, but Anne reposted
She
the
probably has it.
new
Oh,
version.
so she posted a new version and you want to undo the revision.
Just one little revision of everything.
Okay, so what I would suggest is, can you tell us what that revision is here? And then maybe just as a follow-up, just send it a quick email to Anne so that she knows. Or Anne, if you think you can capture it, let's see how complicated it
Yeah,
is.
it's not that complicated, and I did already email Anne about it.
Okay.
The original was Ms. Clifford said that MOU and grant agreements are for 30 months and allow the grantees to request an extension. And I changed it to Ms. Clifford said that MOU and grant agreements are for 30 months and suggested allowing the grantees to request an extension. That's stupid. Of course, they can already request that. I just misread the sentence, so I want to go back to and allow the grantees to request an extension.
Okay. So that wasn't a motion, but we'll take
I
it.
move to that the CPC accept those minutes as amended.
I said,
As suggested right there. When we have a second, and with seeing no other hands raised for any other additional comments, and now that we've got a motion to accept the minutes, I'll go ahead and do a vote. Paul, you are on mute, but I saw you affirmatively
Yes.
nod your head.
Yes.
Yes. Ed,
Aye.
John, you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you, John. Eve,
Yes.
Sue,
Aye.
Nancy,
I,
and I think I got everybody. I will vote yes because you can vote yes even if you're not at a meeting. So I vote to approve those minutes. That brings us, I believe, to the end of our agenda, with the exception of, we didn't have it on it, but any public comment or any other general comments from the committee? We've got a few members of the public here. Wonderful. With that, Anne, can you if you've got it handy, can you remind us of our next meeting date, just so that people, if they've take a moment to note it on their calendars?
Sorry, give me a minute. I was gonna look this up earlier.
9th, July 9th.
July 9th. Okay. So duly noted. And with that, I adjourn this meeting.